begin with breaking news. Milton Friedman, noted economist and 1976 Nobel Prize winner, is dead. I'm kidding, of course. This is neither breaking nor even news. Friedman died on November 16, 2006. But if he still had teeth today, I'm certain he would be grinding them after watching all the attention towards sustainability. Mark my words, this will take up even more oxygen in the room for the foreseeable future than it already has. Some of you may be asking, what's a retired ex-banker like me doing as a speaker at a sustainability summit? It took a bit of reflection on my part to answer that question, but perhaps my experience in reading the tea leaves of sustainability will help you in your journey. Consider the following. 2 years ago, the Franciscan parish that I worship at provided me with an opportunity to appreciate that, indeed, St. Francis is much more than an animal whisperer and lover of nature. He could well be considered the patron saint of the sustainability movement that he began in Assisi almost 900 years ago. Pope Francis drove a stake into the ground on this topic with his encyclical Laudato Si in 2015, validating the direction of the Catholic social movement over the past centuries. In October last year, an invitation to speak at an ESG panel at my business school reunion opened my eyes to how immersed I already was in sustainability. For instance, in my work as senior consultant at the International Finance Corporation, sustainability is a front and center objective. As a board member of the Maybank Investment Banking Group, I've marveled at how they have quite literally bet the bank on a sustainability strategy, not just for themselves, but for their clients as well. At Metro Pacific Hospital Holdings, we are on a fast track to establish the ESG committee as a standing board function. I was invited to join the board of Raslight Corporation, a renewable energy company based in northern Luzon that recently went public. Then, to make sure I got the joke, God conspired to elect me onto the board of trustees of the Philippine chapter of the United Nations Global Compact Network. The delicious irony to this is that I was elected not because of my former lifelong vocation as a banker, but in my capacity as a board member of ICM, an NGO that serves the bottom third of Filipinos living below the poverty line. In doing so, he nudged me to consider my role at GCNP as the voice of our ultra-poor constituency, perhaps in a manner similar to how he used Brazilian Cardinal Claudio Humes when he whispered to certain Jorge Bergoglio at the time, when he was elected Pope. He said, "Don't forget the poor." Indeed, eliminating poverty is Sustainable Development Goal number 1. There must be a reason for this, don't you think? Back to the panel discussion at my business school reunion. The theme of my short portion was summarized in a two-word question. Who pays? Climate change and poverty are inextricably intertwined, with poor nations facing the blunt of climate change impacts. According to the latest Climate Risk Index from German Watch, 8 out of the 10 countries hardest hit by climate change between 2000 and 2019 were low to lower middle income countries. Post-COVID, up to 132 million people could be pushed into extreme poverty by climate change by 2030. Closer to home, the Philippine Statistical Authority estimates that poverty incidence rose to 23.7% in 2021 from a low of 20%. That's 3.9 million more Filipinos who have dipped below the poverty line. The Sustainable Development Goal of Zero Hunger by 2030, or SDG 2, will almost surely be missed by almost 660 million people based on current trends, 30 million higher than a pre-COVID-19 scenario. Like many countries, the Philippines faces an energy trilemma: environment, energy security, and affordability or equity. Despite that, we only contribute 0.3% to global carbon emissions, and I can't stress this more strongly, in relative terms, much less per capita. And yet we often like to act like we're bigger than we really are on the world stage. We've adopted solutions that look elegant from a Western business school perspective, but are hardly applicable, not to mention equitable, to our citizens. Over a decade ago, in part to appease Western nations, we implemented an energy policy that now costs us 20 billion pesos a year, equal to the 2019 conditional cash transfer social assistance to the 10 million poorest Filipinos, and the annual budgets of each of environment and natural resources, finance, foreign affairs, justice, and science and technology. What's worse is we have over a decade more of this obligation, a transaction that has had the unintended consequence of skewing the Gini index even more unfavorably for this country. While we're not blameless, after all, we are the third largest polluter of oceans in terms of plastic waste. The takeaway here is that we have a global problem that requires local solutions. This can't just be a matter of copying what the West does. And yet, there's a common global thread to the strategy that we can all rally around. To sustain the sustainability, pun intended, we must remember it's up to us. And who is us? The private sector. We need to get involved. Check that. We need to lead. Government, of course, has a role to play. They are our face in these summits and our best place to show a united stand in our position vis-a-vis other countries. As our Secretary of Finance so aptly stated after the Glasgow Accord, and I, of course, paraphrase, yes, we commit to reducing greenhouse gases by 75% by 2030. But you, referring to the industrialized nations, are paying for 72% of it. They also have a vital role to play as interlocutor as and between civil society, development finance institutions, and the private sector. For instance, significant work has already been conducted by the UNDP in identifying investment opportunity areas, or IOAs, by SDG impact in various countries around the world. In Brazil, in conjunction with their government, they identified 21 IOAs in 13 subsectors, 5 business models, and 5 need cases. Indonesia also recently completed their study. UNDP, if you're listening, what about us? But we need to do more than that. We need to take a leadership role. For starters, we must relegate CSR, or corporate social responsibility, to the dustbin of history as a quaint buzzword that has served its purpose. We must discard the strategy of relegating CSR to a department of 1, 2, 3 or so mid-level professionals whose job it is to manage the pittance of an annually allocated budget as a token attempt to justify or counterbalance the profits that the company generates in its core business. For as long as we consider our responsibility to the rest of society as a cost center, this will not work. We need to find a value in sustainability. We must find a narrow path of the synthesis between responsible capitalism and innovation. To do so, we must look beyond our mission and vision for the companies that we represent to seek the purpose of our existence in the society that we live in. We must view the Sustainable Development Goals as a lens through which we develop our purpose, which in turn springs the mission and vision of the firm. I know what many of you are thinking. Where do we get the money for all of this? Well, it's a time-honored maxim that business creates resources when it meets needs and makes a profit. The conventional wisdom is that business profits from creating social problems, for example, deprioritizing the maintenance of a safe working environment or resisting environmental improvement due to costs to make higher profits. But as Michael Porter of Harvard Business School has argued, business profits from solving social problems. Yes, I believe that it is possible to create shared value, which in simple terms is the sum of social value and economic value. Stated differently, the business opportunity here is to address a social issue with a business model. This, in my view, is the higher form of capitalism, as it was meant to be. Perhaps this is the evolved society that John Maynard Keynes envisioned before his political economic model was co-opted by liberal economists. The market's already taking notice. To date, it's reported that $12 trillion of investment capital has identified sustainability as a key criterion for investment in its companies. But before we get too excited to receive this money, let's recognize that this is currently only going to deep, efficient, and transparent markets. We have much to do in reforming our capital markets and raising the transparency bar for our corporates. But these corporates will continue to resist for as long as they view the direction as costly and not NPV positive. SEC, PSE, PDEX, FINEX, are you listening? Finally, as inadvertently happened to me, I ask that you reflect on where you are in your professional and personal journey. Watch the signposts If you're still listening to me now, let this forum be the spark, if you're beginning, or the kick in the behind, if you're ready to launch, that gets you going on the journey to sustainability. Let's, and in using this word, I mean all of you watching this who are in positions of influence, including myself perhaps, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. Not only gaze upwards and outwards and ask the question of who pays, but turn inwards and ask what part we can play and pay, of course, with the prospect of earning a fair return. Let's take our cue from the efforts of our governments to address the existential issues that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals have identified. Through the lens of the 17 SDGs, let's develop our purpose from which our mission and vision spring. Then let's push this down the organization as far as we can, not just through the narrow pipe of CSR, but everywhere in the company. Not everyone is in the same boat, but for sure, we are all sinking. Let's plug our leaks in any way that we can and in a way that works for the benefit of all. I'm Dennis Montecillo, and I thank you for this opportunity.